What is going on, guys? Jason Burke here, Styles Clash for Life, coming at you on YouTube, and today I've got another edition of The Drive-In, where I watch recently released films and tell you guys whether they're worth watching, worth waiting for, or worth skipping altogether. I'm going to let you guys know right now it is extremely hot in my kitchen. It is 95 plus degrees, so please excuse all my breathing problems, my sweating. It's going to be a rough video to get through, but a very worth it one, because I'm talking about one of my personal most anticipated release of 2021 in the horror movie genre, and one that everyone that watches this channel has been waiting to hear about, Candyman 2021. I grew up watching the Candyman movies on VHS. I love all three of the Candyman films, but especially the classic original. When I heard that Jordan Peele and Monkey Paw were producing this film and recreating it, and not only recreating it, but doing a spiritual sequel, not just doing a remake, I want to give Jordan Peele and his team and Nia DaCosta and everyone credit for doing a spiritual sequel and connecting this film to the first film and making something new and not just another remake. They easily could have just made a brand new Candyman character and just done the same thing over again, but they linked things to the original film and made themselves a new movie. I want to talk to you guys about kind of how it played out and the things I did and didn't like. Now, it's going to be a spoiler-free start to the review. I will do the spoiler-free stuff first, but this is the kind of film that I have to do a deep dive into, and I have to get psychological with the plot and the story. So I have to do that in a spoiler fashion at the end of the video. So if you want to hear specifics about what I did and didn't like, that's going to be in the spoiler section at the end. But first, let's get to the spoiler-free stuff and let's talk about it. 2021's Candyman was written by Win Rosenfeld, Jordan Peele, and Nia DaCosta, and directed by Nia DaCosta. That is an important distinction. I like that Twitter has been doing the say her name thing for Nia DaCosta. People think this is a Jordan Peele directed movie. It is not. It is co-written by Jordan Peele, but Nia DaCosta directed and Jordan Peele produced. That's important to give Nia DaCosta the credit she deserves. And she did a pretty admirable job with directing such a famous namesake. She took a very popular cult film from the 90s and made a good spiritual sequel here. Starring Yahya Abdul-Mateen II and Teyana Paris, and I hope I didn't butcher those names. They star as Anthony McCoy and Breonna Cartwright. And the story is as follows. Basically, a painter, a famous artist who is trying to, he moves to the area of Cabrini Green, which is the same area in the first film, which we'll discuss as well. But Anthony McCoy moves into a place with his wife, or girlfriend, I guess, Breonna Cartwright. And they move in, and he's trying to get famous off of his paintings, but he kind of can't find his footing. So he winds up running into a local town laundromat runner who tells him the story of Candyman. And Anthony McCoy kind of dives into the Candyman story of Cabrini Green and kind of what the town was brought up on. And he winds up falling in love with the lore and using that story to make paintings based on the Candyman story. And they become pretty famous for some good reasons and some bad reasons. And then, of course, the Candyman character comes back. He gets summoned, of course, as he always does. These characters will never learn in these films not to say Candyman in the mirror 5 times. Candyman comes back and reigns terror from that point forward. Now, again, not going to spoil anything yet. Positives. Let's start with the positives. I love the gore in this film. There's maybe not enough gore for me, but the gore that there is done very well. There's realistic gore. There's a good amount of blood splatter. When we see the kills on screen, we get some really good realistic gore and some stuff that really makes you cringe a little bit. You see a couple of special effects. You see a couple of other transformational effects, some skin stuff like that makes you feel genuinely unsettled. In a horror film like this, and a famous slasher lore, you want good gore and you want good effects, and they were all done practically and they were done well. And the stuff that wasn't entirely practical was hidden well enough that the CGI, for the most part, looked really, really good. There's 1 or 2 things the CGI wasn't great on, but the rest of it was all done very well. Everything felt practical, and all the stuff that was done with good detail and made you feel a little bit uneasy. Cinematography. I love the way this is shot. Not only is it shot very cleanly, and all the standard shots are just very good, very clean, but they used a lot of cool angles on this. They used a lot of passerby shots. They did a lot of pans. They used foreground elements. They did a lot of rack focusing. They did a lot of character-to-character over-the-shoulder shots, a lot of dirty shots. They did a lot of stuff using tables and backgrounds, really cool lights and stuff like that. So I love the way this was shot. They used a lot of creative stuff. They used a lot of mirrors in this film, which always works well. They used a lot of shadowing and shading around the antagonist character, so that was really well done. Love the way this was shot. It was very creative in a film that didn't have to be creative necessarily. It could have gotten away with your standard jump scares, and it did some of those, but it also used a lot of the way it was shot more than sound design. Usually these films rely on jump scares and sound design. This film relied on kind of unique shots and unique colors to make some of the scares feel effective, and they did a good job with that. And getting into it further, color grading and lighting was excellent. Color grading always gets overlooked in these reviews, and that's why I always bring it up. I love the fact that some of the galleries and stuff like that, they used a lot of long, narrow hallways. They used a lot of, like I said, objects in the way of the camera to make you wonder what's coming around the corner. They used a lot of mirrors effectively and not just in the standard way. They did a lot of just like neon style colors, a lot of like almost giallo lighting for some of the backgrounds. They used some projections and some movie stuff in the backgrounds, which is nice. They used some really cool neons, like some reds, some purples, some stuff like that, to make you feel like you're stuck in a pretty intense place. Candyman's character always got off on the poetic aspect of his character and the luring and the seductress or seductor aspect of what the original Candyman was, and you kind of felt they were enclosed. For Candyman to be effective, the character has to be helpless and kind of transfixed and kind of stuck in small spaces, and they did a pretty good job of that here. The final blanket positive, I would say, would be locations. They used, I think, I'm pretty sure from looking at it, it looked very similar, if not the exact same. They used, I believe, the same building and same location as the original Cabrini Green. They kept bringing up Cabrini Green being the original location, and I think it was the exact same. If not, they made it look the same, which was great. I really enjoyed that. And there was a lot of nice callbacks to the original. Nostalgia is a nice piece in this film, which brings me now to the most controversial topic in this review, which gives me a lot of things to discuss. I'll try the best I can being vague first in the non-spoiler section. My biggest plus and biggest minus for the same review here is the lore, the original lore. If you've watched the original Candyman or all three of the originals, you know the story. Daniel Robitaille, Tony Todd, his character is the son of a slave, and he winds up painting and being a famous painter that gets hired by white rich aristocrats to paint for them. He paints a girl, one of the farmer's daughters. A white girl. He falls in love with the white girl, and because he's black and he's a slave and she's an aristocrat, I guess, or like back then in the racial times, the more racial times, I should say. Tony Todd's character gets his hand cut off, replaced by a hook, gets covered and smeared and slathered in honey, and stung to death by bees and then set on fire. That's the original story of the first three films. In this movie, you get some of that, but you don't get exactly that. Now, to be clear about this, if you're coming into this film expecting your standard Candyman character and callbacks to the original film, you will get some of that in this film, but it will not be exactly that. So they did a nice job in this film, I think, as a positive and a negative, in bringing back some of what the original story was, and also adding their own twist and their own originality onto what the lore of Candyman is. So it's part of what we grew up on, and part of something entirely different, which again to me is a good thing, and also a bad thing, and I can only discuss that further. I'm sorry for the vague terms, but I can discuss that further in the spoiler section. So I like the fact that it was original and different, and I like the nostalgia, but somewhere in the middle for me, it gets a little bit lost, and you're kind of wondering about their choices when it comes to the last 45 minutes. Really the entire thing. It's a very different trajectory from the originals. So we'll talk about that more in the spoilers. Another plus and minus for me is the pace. This film is 2 hours long, and it doesn't feel like 2 hours. It does a good job in telling its story, and there are some good kills, and there is some good gore, and there is some good story, but there's moments that it could be paced a little bit more. There are times that I want a little more gore than I get. There are times I don't want the film to cut away so much. There are times that I don't want so much invisibility in the kills and stuff like that. There are times that I want to see more of the Candyman character on screen than I actually get. So while the pacing is good and the 2 hours does fly by, I think they could have action-packed it a little more, especially in that middle frame where it gets a little slow. They do too much talking and too little action in parts for me. So the pacing is a positive and a negative here. Needs more kills, needs more of the Candyman character. But again, overall, I'm going to say this is a good film. Again, I have some qualms with the story. I have some qualms with the original lore kind of being spliced in with the new stuff. So some of that stuff is good, some is bad. But overall, again, cinematography, lighting, acting, location, nostalgia, those things are all major positives. And I like the direction Nia DaCosta brings, and I like the three writers and how they chose to kind of carry this series on and give ground for possible future Candyman movies. It ends up in a very fun, important to see the last couple shots and how they progress it and where it could go from here. I like the slow torture of the main character, Anthony McCoy, played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen. I like how they built on the stuff we already know. So I'm going to give this film overall a pretty well-paced, well-lit, well-shot, well-acted 7 out of 10. And probably one of my top 3 favorite horror films of this year, if not my favorite, in spite of the fact that I've got some controversial issues to discuss in it. So 7 out of 10, I recommend it. If you have not seen it, go check it out. Well worth your watch, whether you wind up loving or hating it. It's worth checking out for the good and the bad. 7 out of 10, I recommend it. Now, for those of you guys that have seen it or you want to hear the spoilers, here we go. Okay, so the story basically is this. Anthony McCoy's character gets stung by a bee, and his skin and his arms start turning out to be kind of like Daniel Robitaille, Tony Todd in the first Candyman. Anthony McCoy goes to visit the guy at Burke's Laundry, the laundromat townie guy, and he says that his Candyman is an old town vagrant, like a homeless town vagrant who used to pass out candy to kids. One of the kids was running from the guy, realizing he was friendly and trying to give the guy candy. The guy starts to hide and live in the walls, and the cops come and find the guy and kill him dead because he's black, even though he's not threatening. And then we come to find out Cabrini Green's got a history of white cops killing black people. Very, very current day stuff. Very Jordan Peele-esque topics here. White cops killing innocent black people just because they're black and they feel threatened by them. So Candyman is not necessarily Daniel Robitaille in the original story, but it's a history of different racial aspects of black men being unfairly killed where they become the Candyman. So the story repeats itself over and over again in Cabrini Green. That leads us to Burke telling us about Daniel Robitaille, saying he was the first Candyman. His story was the first Candyman, and it just is one of many. So they do reference Daniel Robitaille in the story, but they say he's just one Candyman, and Candyman doesn't represent one person anymore. It's not just Tony Todd. It's all the racial injustices that result in murders in this town. So I like the twist, but I don't necessarily like that Daniel Robitaille is not necessarily the representative for it. It does change the original films. I like that we still get the Daniel Robitaille films, and he's still the official first Candyman, but now the Candyman is more of an idea than a person. It does take away from the slasher physical killer aspect of it, but it does add a nice story to it, so that's why I give it a positive and a negative. They do reference also the kid from the first film. Anthony McCoy winds up being the baby that is kidnapped in the first film. When Helen Lyle, who is represented in this, Virginia Madsen, has a voiceover, I believe, in this. I didn't hear her, but I saw her credited. The kid from the first film is the main character. He goes and sees his mom, who's in the first film, different actor, I believe, but she's in the first film, Vanessa Williams. The main character, he goes to see her, realizes that he's the son that was kidnapped, and the Candyman has found him again. So they do get back to the original story. But they start off with Candyman being that other candy guy that lives in the vagrant that lives in the walls, and they eventually get back around to the fact that Daniel Robitaille was the original Candyman. So they do tell that story and continue the story from the first one, the sequel of the kidnapped child who's found by Candyman. But they start off by telling you Candyman's someone different, and then tell you the Candyman's everyone, and then tell you the Candyman who is pursuing Anthony McCoy is Daniel Robitaille. So they use the original character, but not until like halfway through the film they tell his story. And then at the end of the film, again, spoilers, the last shot of the film, Anthony McCoy kind of becomes Candyman. He gets shot unfairly because he's black. And then Candyman morphs from Anthony McCoy into Tony Todd. He turns into Tony Todd, who's on screen and says, "Tell everyone," because they want the Candyman story to go on forward. The guy at the laundromat is trying to keep the Candyman lore alive by having innocent black people killed. So when Anthony McCoy is killed, he turns into Tony Todd anyway, and Tony Todd says, "Tell everyone." So they want Candyman to go on forever. So I like the open-ended aspect, and I love that Tony Todd made an appearance here. It was such a fun, nostalgic, cool thing for us. But if you have Tony Todd, and you're going to have the story revolve around the kid from the first film, why not use Tony Todd as Candyman the entire time? They started off telling us Candyman was somebody else, and then Candyman wound up being everybody, and then they wind up going back to the first story anyway, and then showing Tony Todd who was there. So why would you not use him for the entire thing if you have him? So again, I like how they build on the story. I like that it goes along with the Jordan Peele style. I like the originality Nia DaCosta brought to it, but I'm also confused as to why they took us in all these different directions for what Candyman is when you have the story of Tony Todd there and you feature Tony Todd in the story. So I'm a little bit torn. I like the nostalgia, I like the freshness, but where they combine, it kind of loses me a little bit. It's kind of confusing in how they decided to structure and build the story and how they use different Candyman actors when they could have just used Tony Todd as the Candyman representative the entire time. You could have told the story that Candyman has become all these stories down the line and still use Tony Todd as a physical representation of Candyman the entire time. They used somebody else and then went to Tony Todd later. So I don't really understand how they physically wanted to tell that story and how it wasn't a linear structure. So while they took it a fresh direction and they combined the original with the new stuff, they did it in such a way that kind of confused me and left me a little bit like, why didn't they do it another way? So I like that, but I also didn't like it for that reason. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you've seen this, tell me in the comments below. I still give this film on first viewing a 7 out of 10. There's a lot of things that I enjoyed about it in spite of the story beats. They still did bring us some nostalgia, and I appreciate Tony Todd being on screen. So tell me in the comments below what you thought of this film if you saw it. If you have not, please go check it out. Tell me in the comments, like, share, and subscribe what other future films I should review on this channel, and I will see you guys soon.